I'm 95 years old. So with that span of time, you can just imagine that I remember President Aguinaldo all the way to President Duterte. And that's my advantage over most people in this land today, because I have seen history from the time of the Americans all the way to now. History was totally distorted to favor one group.
And it is unfortunately continuing. That is why exercises such as these are important.
Little by little, the truth will come out.
Well,
I'm glad that you have asked me to join this conversation so that at least we can somehow correct the distortions of history.
I am very grateful to you.
And I'm willing to challenge anybody here in this country to debate with me about the events.
We put this together really because of the mail that I have been receiving in my social media. And the millennials have a different approach, it seems, to the events of history, the history of your lifetime for that matter. And the millennials seem to want to know what it is behind the decisions that my father and the members of his government made in the time of the Marcos administrations. And so we thought the best, most authoritative person that we could find would be you, as you were not only in the middle of the action, as it were, but you were part of the decision-making process of many of the important events that occurred.
During the first 3 years of martial law, you can open your window, leave your house, nobody will touch it. That's how peaceful the country was.
So it wasn't the typical country under military rule where you had tanks in the streets and you had soldiers pulling people out of their homes.
Of course, in the beginning we had curfew.
Yes, we had. Yes, I remember that.
We had to give grant passes.
So, Tito, the account you're giving as to the approach, the build-up towards the declaration of martial law and the actual implementation of it and the enforcement of the military rule is very different from what we are hearing. And for you, Tito, for example, I mean, I hear it too, but of course, it's a different. You come from a different perspective. What is the biggest fallacy that young people now are being fed about the reasons behind and the actual events of martial law?
They claim that we killed a lot of people, and that's why when I was interviewed by someone some time ago, I challenged her. Name me one that we executed, what we killed other than Lim Seng.
What was the accusation? Was that they summarily executed?
That we had 70,000 persons arrested, which was not true. Maybe if they will include the people who violated curfew and the jaywalkers, maybe you can reach that number.
But anyone who was
people can go out at night. They can go out and fish. They can go out to farm, they can go out. They were free, in fact. Of course, if you are a member of the rebel group or a warlord or who violated the criminal law, you have to be arrested, whether you have martial law or not.
It sometimes, I'm mystified sometimes by the lack of understanding of the simple fact that if you attack the government, you attack the state needs to defend itself.
Of course.
And that's why fighting would break out. And
name me one person that was arrested because of political or religious belief during that period. None.
They were all for criminal acts.
Name me one person that was arrested simply because he criticized President Marcos. None.
But there were a lot of critics still very, very vociferous and very speaking out against him and his administration, even during the martial law, when the country was under martial law.
Jovi Salonga, for instance. Oh, He was involved in the Light the Fire movement and many others. There were very few were arrested. And they were released. They were inconvenienced for a while, but they were released. The late Pepe Jokno, he didn't want to be released. I told Pepe, just sign anything and just get out of here. I told him.
All of that seems to have been lost in the accounts that we hear now.
Well, I cannot blame the so-called millennials when they were born in 1980, no?
Let's say,
Yeah. Well,
that's
they
a
did
good,
not know anything. They just, what they know is what they read or heard.
And it is,
They read something that was based on inaccurate facts. During martial law, there were no massacres like what happened in Benjola during the supposed democratic government of Cory Aquino.
maybe you could explain to these young people the approach that you took to governance. Kasi Tito, I remember when I was young, I would listen to my father's speeches and lagi kong naririnig the phrase nation building. And I have not heard that phrase since 1986, and it does not seem to be the priority or the guiding principle in governance anymore.
You mentioned about nation building, which was a battle cry of the Marcos government.
That's right, Tito.
That was all included in the national plan that was prepared by the brain trust of your dad. And that covers infrastructure, agriculture, energy, and education. And that's why when we started with agriculture, he established irrigation canals, especially in the north and in many parts of the country. And then he went into electrification. The national electrification that we have started with your father. He started the geothermal sources of energy in the country today, which is helping the economy. And then later on, as a part of his national plan, education of the people. And that's why he created the system of state universities that expanded the educational system in the country and made education cheaper for the people. And so many others. He introduced land reform. That's why he was very conscious of the sale of Hacienda Luisita during the Garcia administration. This was a part of his land reform program. Proposed the establishment of a nuclear plant, which was derailed by Cory Aquino because of their anger and revenge against the Marcos administration.
Dito you mentioned the lobbying of the big landowners, the hacienda owners, and for the exemptions from the land reform. But I think the term that around that time was we were beginning to hear my father speaking out against the group of oligarchs.
Correct.
That were controlling many segments of the economy.
Correct.
And were not helping or supporting the national program.
Oligarchies existed during the time of your dad and even before that. And even now, they are still around. They control the economy, they control the agriculture because they own the haciendas, they control the communication, they want to control even government. If you will remember, you have to talk to interest groups to be able to run for public office in those days. Controlled Meralco, they controlled the media, they controlled the newspapers and the radio, many facets of the industry. The industrialization of the country was controlled by the so-called oligarchs of the land.
So this is one of the elements that pushed the government towards the declaration of martial law in 72.
Apart from the fact that indeed there was a need of it, because what was the social condition of the land at this point. We were dealing with separatism in Mindanao. We were dealing with a very strong communist party. We were dealing with the onset of drugs menace in the country. We were dealing with political warlords over the land, and the high criminality in the land. And what was our instrument of power at that point? We had only less than 50,000 in the armed services. That included the constabulary, the army, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Coast Guard. And our weapons were carbines and Garands of World War II vintage.
World War II vintage.
Against the Belgian FALS, the Kalashnikov or AK-47 of our adversaries.
I think nakakalimutan dito the extent of this warlordism and the size of the private armies.
The size of firearms in the hands of the civilian population was much more than the capability of the armed forces of the Philippines and the constabulary. When martial law was declared,
there was an
we
amnesty.
harvested about 600,000 guns all over the country of all kinds.
As opposed to our 50,000
Less than 50,000 to be exact. I think we had only about 48,000.
uniform services.
Yeah.
So that people do not realize the extent of the warlordism, because I don't think we have the modern equivalent.
Apart from these factors that I told you, their political organization, especially the political organization of the Communist Party of the Philippines, was extensive. They have a united front that was very strong. Until now, that united front is operating through the NDF. Oh, they covered labor, the universities, academe, farmers, fishermen, women, teachers, all over. They infiltrated even the church. And we did not only have the armed elements of the Communist Party and the separatists, we have the Christian Liberation Army. Even the church was involved.
So in that time, the government assessed that the largest security problem was the communist insurgency.
Correct.
And that is that the martial law was really a response to that
Correct. One of the reasons why President Marcos finally declared martial law, very few people will remember this now, was because there was already a working coalition between the Liberal Party and the New People's Army, the new Communist Party of the Philippines, headed by Sison at this point. And President Marcos realized that the country was too fragile with a very limited military capability to contain the problem.
But this is something new. I did not know there was a formal agreement or between a political party.
God. Ninoy Aquino and I met in the house of Ramon Silay in Urdaneta village. He was my neighbor. Paul Aquino is still alive. He was present in that meeting. He was the one who reported to me that he had a meeting with the leadership of the Communist Party and they were discussing a coalition government.
But this was together with the Liberal Party at the time?
He was a member of the Liberal Party.
But the Liberal Party hierarchy was part of this arrangement? Or?
When President Marcos finally confronted them with information, they refused to talk to President Marcos.
I didn't proclaim martial law alone. It is made to appear as if I just signed the decree and said, I impose martial law on each and every one of you. No. I asked the legislature to please pass a law proclaiming martial law because there was anarchy in the country. Now, let me say this. The opposition was strong. And they were members of the Security Council, and somehow they adopted the resolution which required that there be a unanimous vote for the armed forces to be able to move And therefore the armed forces was immobilized. At the same time, I asked the opposition party to come and join me in a coalition government. I offered one half of the cabinet. And of course they laughed at me and said, why should we join you? We're going to take over the government. By the time you are through with the exercise, you're dead.
How was the evolution of the thinking within the administration to finally come to the decision that my father declare martial law in
Because
72?
it started when they invented the Jabida massacre. I say invented because until now I've not heard of anyone who complained about anybody being massacred in Corregidor. No one. The only one who was who appeared as a member of the trainees, supposedly the Muslim trainees in Corregidor, was that fellow who swam across the Corregidor to Cavite, which was the invention of Montano and Ninoy Aquino. And because of that outburst, political outburst of Ninoy, we lost Sabah. And then that Jabita massacre, what do you call this, injured the political stature of the Marcos regime, followed by the Plaza Miranda grenading in 1971. And because of that Plaza Miranda, I was a victim. I was a candidate afterwards for senator, and I lost because we were blamed for Plaza Miranda, although that was the handiwork of the Communist Party. The disorder that was brought about by them, by the left especially, was too much to bear by the country at that point. As the Secretary of Defense, I had to fight both the Muslims in Mindanao and the Christians. And then at the same time, there were also datos who rose against the government. The group of the MNLF were sponsored by Malaysia because of the limitations imposed by the government, the regime, or the political situation in the country before martial law. The hands of the president was limited, so he finally decided, after he was re-elected, to impose martial law. He asked me to study his powers under the Commander-in-Chief provision. I was Secretary of Justice at the time.
The declaration and the implementation in the very first days. I was not here. I was abroad studying. And I remember that I just got the news from a phone call. My father had mentioned it previously, and he said that things are getting pretty bad. And he had spoken about the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. And after that, he was talking about that he had hoped not to declare martial law. But I got the news that
your dad asked me to prepare this study in December of 1969 because he was anticipating that he will finally have to face the music. When we finished the studies about January of 1970, at this point the President transferred me to the Department of National Defense. And then he waited from 1970, 71. He allowed the election of 1971 to go through, where the nation was experiencing violence and disorder. Because he did not want to declare it. He was hesitating to use his Commander-in-Chief powers. Until finally, in 1972, he decided.
My countrymen, as of the 21st of this month, I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
So it's not remembered very well, or it is not well documented, or it is not well disseminated about how large and how severe the problem was of the communist uprising and we still see the fighting in Mindanao, but it's over a different different
Well,
ideology
we
now.
were able to arrest all of the leaders, including Jose Maria Sison, Juliet, the wife, and several of the leading commanders of the Communist Party, and emasculated the organization until later on, when we had, after EDSA, Cory restored the problem because he released all the
released all of
leaders of
those
the Communist
leaders.
Party, and then, including Father Balweg of the Cordilleras, and then brought back Miswari from
Saudi
exile
Arabia, yes.
to revive the MNL problem.
And was there a reason stated
That
for
is where
why
I
they did
parted
that?
ways
With
with Cory.
Oo. In the face of all of this, I think we come to the question: how did you think Cory did as president? Did you think
Well,
wala
you
kami
know, I
dito,
must
so
tell
hindi
you
namin
that,
alam masyado yung mga detalye.
You know, Bongbong, having been involved in the cabinet of President Marcos, and I'm not saying this to denigrate anybody, I was dismayed when in my first cabinet meeting with Cory, he did not make any decision. I'm sorry to say this, but I realized in that first meeting that I had in that cabinet, that the president that succeeded Jordan did not know anything about governance. You know, the people are amorphous and they're open to propaganda. And these people are expected.
You believe that propaganda was a very large aspect of the yellow movement?
They have always been like that. Even during the time of your father, we were. They have people in all the media outlets.
In your view, has the role of the media increased or decreased over the years?
But it will increase, especially with the speed of communication now. We have the cell phone, the social media. You can read the news
On your telephone.
in your cell phone, and you can also text your opinion. They can manipulate public opinion. Even the surveys will be suspect at that point.
Well, the surveys have already become a little bit are taken with a grain of salt already.
Correct.
So I guess that is a distinct possibility. So despite the fact that all of these things, the performances of those who ally themselves with the yellow group have been dominant, do you feel that dominance will still for the last 30 years? Do you think
No,
that dominance
I
will
don't think-
continue?
I do not know whether they're dominant. But,
Well, not now, but
Yeah.
they have been.
you know, if they have a smartmatic. Bongbong, when I was in that government, I knew that I was there only temporarily because from the very start, I was actually like a pariah in the cabinet of Cory.
Yes, because you were considered the main implementer of martial law. And I think some of the orders that were signed by you and by then President Marcos, so kayo talaga ang sinisisi doon sa martial
At
law.
saka, hindi lang yun eh. 1 month after your father departed, I thought he will reopen the Batasan Pambansa. No, he did not reopen. What she did was to consolidate power unto herself by writing her own revolutionary constitution and assumed the powers, the executive power and the legislative power. The only thing she left was judicial power.
In the face of all of this, I think we come to the question: how did you think Cory did as president? Did you think wala kami
I
dito,
must
so
tell
hindi
you
namin
that,
alam masyado yung mga detalye.
You know, Bongbong, having been involved in the cabinet of President Marcos, and I'm not saying this to denigrate anybody. I was dismayed when in my first cabinet meeting with Cory, he did not make any decision. He will say, oh, Tito, Gingona, Tito, ikaw naman magsalita. Mon, ikaw magsalita. Oh, Doy. Ganun. Well, no decision. And I realized finally, personally, I'm sorry to say this, but I realized in that first meeting that I had in that cabinet, that the president that succeeded Jordan did not know anything about governance. And it showed afterwards.
Well, it wasn't.
He was the ones governing the country was not Cory. Other people who were around her. Oh.
Well, it's not surprising because if you look at her record, she has no experience or even inclination, as far as I could tell, for government work or public service.
Yeah.
At,
well, I do not know whether it is true that she was very fond of playing mahjong. And that's why.
Well, since we've come to the subject of Cory Aquino, and I guess that brings us to EDSA. We've had more than one, we number them, EDSA 1 and EDSA 2. But this popular uprising has become already a part of the political narrative or the political, the political methods of unseating a government or bringing a government down. In your view, is that a good development? Should it be part of the narrative? Should we choose our leaders this way?
You cannot prevent people from marching in the streets to peaceably assemble for redress of grievances. That's constitutional. But in the case of the first EDSA, the question is why EDSA? Who decided that the event must be in EDSA? Cory did not decide that. None of the Liberal Party people decided that. They were all gone. They were in Cebu.
While the drama in Manila was unfolding, Aquino was in the southern city of Cebu, continuing a post-election campaign advocating civil disobedience.
It was there because we went to Camp Aguinaldo,
right.
and that is where the confrontation took place. Now, as far as we were concerned in the RAM, we never planned to involve the people. It was plainly, purely a military action, but with one condition, that we will not harm the president and his family. It just happened that it burst that day because of things that I do not want to discuss now, no? Involving a group of generals who had also a political plan. I do not know whether your father, I'm sure your father did not know, or your mother. But they had a political plan for the country.
To establish an alternative government?
From my point of view, I had to do something about it at that point in our history because I was involved with the military. I was the head of the Department of Defense. I did not involve the generals of the military because they were involved. And so I had to work with young people in the military who were idealistic enough to agree to protect the interest of the country and the Filipino people without involving the people themselves. You see? But God was with us because that event turned without any bloodshed, turned out to be bloodless. No?
Yes.
Oh.
Because
your father restrained himself.
I understand you gave them orders to wait.
I told them to wait because
there are massing civilians near our troops, and we cannot keep on withdrawing. They asked us to withdraw yesterday. When I talked to Mr. Enrile, he said you talked to you, we withdraw a little.
My order is to disperse
We cannot withdraw all the time, Mr. President.
without shooting them. No, hold on. You disperse the crowd without shooting them.
I remember many of his advisors at the time in the palace, while we were observing what was happening in the camps with you and General Ramos, many were advising him to
I read the book
attack.
of Art Armisa, no? And I saw the restraint of the president as gleaned from that book. And I saw also the folly of our plan to assault the palace. If we assaulted it, we could have been massacred. Because at that point, you were prepared already.
We were very well prepared. I think it's the first time we are able to talk about it.
We would have been massacred there, you know.
In fact,
but I think there was a guiding hand that more or less controlled that event. By the way, I did not know that your dad was sick, huh? If you remember, I went to the palace. I do not know whether you heard about this. July of 1985, I was resigning.
Why were you resigning?
Because some people reported to the president that my men in the Department of Defense were scaling buildings at night. It was true that we did, but that was in connection with his instruction to me to organize an anti-terrorist group unit in the Department of Defense.
So on that basis, you thought that you did not, no
No,
longer...
they were saying that you were planning something. Although, to be truthful, at that point we were organizing because I received an information that there was a military junta and that I was supposed to be executed by that junta if something happens to your president. I did not know that the president was sick at that time.
Why were you on the kill list of that junta? Why are you the declared enemy?
Probably because I was a hindrance to their political objective.
So unbeknownst to many or most people, there was a plan for a military takeover already.
Correct.
And the junta was already organized.
Yeah.
Can you tell us who the members of the junta were? Well, maybe for
you will be surprised. The chief of his staff. The general of the head of the Philippine Army, the head of the Philippine Air Force, the head of the Philippine Navy, the head of the Philippine Coast Guard. Those were the members of the junta.
How were they going to take over the reins of power?
According to the information I received, if your father died, they were not supposed to announce it at all. They will keep it away from the knowledge of the public. They will invite all the members of the cabinet in the name of your father for a cabinet meeting. And once we are in the palace, we will be quarantined. But in my case, I will have to be executed.
This is something that, again, I don't think, maybe this is the first time that this information has seen the light of day.
Well,
so the uprising of what became EDSA was not a break with my father. It was an opposition to this junta.
Correct. But it just happened that on the day we went to Aguinaldo, we were already going to be arrested by the presidential guards.
Well, because
of the information that you got, that the palace got. And naturally, we had no other way except to defend ourselves.
I think it reached a fever pitch when you were barricading, because I remember those helicopters, those very famous photograph of the helicopters landing on the roof and unloading firearms and military equipment. And nagbarikada na sila,
That was the helicopter of...
ng army.
No,
yung mga Huey.
That was the helicopter assigned to the Secretary of National Defense.
MND yun. I see. Yun na nga.
That was the helicopter I was using.
But they came and the photographs were published of them unloading firearms, unloading military equipment, communications equipment. And the assessment in the palace at the time was that this is the beginning of a coup d'etat. But we had information beforehand that there was going to be an attack on the palace.
Correct.
I received the information.
But there was no plan to harm the president.
That is what Greg Honasan also told me when we talked about this long after the actual
that
events.
was our common agreement.
And Minister Enrile commandeering the complex housing the Ministry of Defense.
Well, Tito, you know, I have been all this time since 1986. I have been wanting to ask you a question,
Oh.
and I have never found the opportunity to do it. And I think this is a good time.
Yeah.
After all that happened in EDSA, after all of this uprising, etc., nandun na kami, dinala na kami sa Guam and then eventually to Hawaii. Bakit hindi kayo ang nagpresidente? You knew the characters that were involved and you were much more qualified than any of them.
Your dad was giving me the government in the morning of Tuesday, February 25.
I remember, Tito, I was there when he made the phone call to you.
Correct. He was asking me to ask Cory to postpone her oath taking. But I told him I would try. You know, Bongbong, I did not intend to take over power in the first place. But while I was inside Camp Aguinaldo, Camp Crame, I was thinking about what will happen. And I said, if the military will take over, I will involve the country into a possible civil war. Because the election was just finished. There is a big block of votes that voted for Cory. There was a big block of votes that voted for your father. And I was not exposed to the electoral process at that point. I'm sure that if the military took over and I assume power, I will have enemies inside my military organization also. Then there is a possibility that the two forces that fought in that election will combine.
Was it likely?
It's possible.
I suppose yung tropa namin and those who were opposed to you within the MND center.
And then you have the bulk of the military at that point, who did not know where they will situate themselves. All of that I thought about it. By the way, Monday night, I called for Jimmy Ongping to come to Camp Crame, and I said, this event that is happening now will be a protracted event. Let us organize a provisional government to handle the running of our revolutionary government. I said I proposed 5 cabinet positions: just defense, finance, local government, justice, and foreign affairs. Sa inyo yung 4, kako, na posisyon. Sa amin, yung defense. Because I wanted to balance their political forces against the military forces. Alam mong ginawa nila that night? That is where I started to suspect them. They filled all the positions in the cabinet. They organized their own cabinet.
But you had an agreement previous to that.
Well, I had an agreement with Jimmy Ongping. Ay kako, hindi po na mga totoo na tao na itong kausap ko.
Yes, it's always been a mystery to me because you were positioned perfectly to take over the reins of power. And we were all a little surprised watching this again from far away. And we were saying, for sure, I'm sure, si Minister...
I was afraid not for myself, but for the country, that it will cause a bloodbath.
I think you were similar in thinking to my father because one of the reasons, and I asked him this directly, is that why were you so hesitant to use force in 1986? Nung talagang papasukin na yung palasyo, binobomba na tayo, binabaril na tayo, ganun. Why were you not, marami naman kaming tropa, we were very well prepared. Because as I said, we received the information of an imminent attack on the palace 1 week before you and General Ramos went to Crame and made your stand in Crame. So we had the chance to prepare. So we were wondering why did we not fight back with force? And he said that would have been the beginning of a civil war,
Yeah.
which I think is exactly the
Then,
way you saw it.
And that afternoon of when you left the palace, I do not know whether you were with the president.
I was.
When he called me, first he asked me, "Do you have any troops around the palace?" I said, "Mr. President, we do not have any troops around the palace." I said, and but there are people firing at us. Well, those are not our people. Can you send someone to help us to stop those firings? And so I said, I will send. General Lee was there. Then I mentioned to him that I have just spoken to Ambassador Bosworth
Bosworth at the time.
at the time. And then he stopped for a while. And then he said, "Can you call him back and ask him to make available to me the services of General Allen, Teddy Allen, so that we can leave Malacanang?" I called up Bosworth after our conversation. I called up Bosworth and I told him about the request of the president. After a while, Bosworth called me up and he said, "Can you ask General Ramos to coordinate with Teddy Allen to help in the departure of the president from Malacanang?" And that's what I did.
I remember very well that it was General Allen. We remember we were waiting for the American helicopters.
Yeah.
Because the presidential helicopters was also in Malacanang Park.
Yeah.
But they had already been strafed. So may tama na, so they were. But then the proposal was that they would send helicopters from Clark. They sent 2 big helicopters from Clark. And I remember when we crossed Pasig River, the officer who met us was General Allen.
After I talked to the president, I rode to Wakwak, to the house of Josephine Cojuangco, the sister of Cory, because that's where she was. Cory was there. And then when I arrived, his whole cabinet, the people who became her cabinet officials were there, and Doña Aurora. And then I reported to Cory about my conversation with your dad, as well as my conversation with Bosworth, and that the president, your dad, was departing Malacanang. And then Cory did not know anything about that event. She called Bosworth. And then I remember Cory saying, shouted over the phone, "No, I do not want him here.
Yes.
Take him out."
That's it. I remember that. Yeah. I remember that. That was in the middle of the night already. We were already in Clark. The Americans were still did not know quite what to do with us. The original arrangement is that we will be flown to Ilocos.
Cory requested that from Bosworth when I made the report to Cory. And because of the interregnum, the gulo at that point, probably the transmission of the information to the operating units of the American military was delayed.
Well, we were awoken. Well, we hadn't slept, but it was in the middle of the night. I remember General Allen asked to see my father, and I said that he's resting and he's not in the best of health. And what is it about? And he sat us down and he said that we were surrounded by NPA forces and that there were 2 columns of NPA units coming to
There were
attack.
no NPAs.
Well-
That was already, they they misinterpreted the Poway to Hawaii.
That was what eventually became the joke. On that basis, they said, we have to fly you out immediately. And instead of going to Poway, and the excuse that was given was that we cannot fly to Poway because Poway does not have lights to land in the middle of the night.
Because, you know, I knew that your dad had an intention of going up north. Because in the morning of Tuesday, he asked, if I go north, do you think I'll be protected? Of course, I told him. And if I get out of the country, can I come back? And of course, Mr. President, you are a president of the country, you are free to come back to the country. Those were my answers to him. Oh.
So it was very much a decision at that time na ayoko dyan. Basta get him out of the country was then Cory's decision.
Siguro sabi nakinig sila kay Cory, yung mga Amerikano, because sabi niya, peremptory yung kanyang sabi. No, I do not want him here. I take him out of the country.
Well, that seems to be the same report that we got. And actually, eventually, the Americans told us that we were actually said the instruction was that not to be brought anymore to Ilocos, but to be taken out of the country. So Tito, let's take all of this now. With this as the foundation of all of the as a historical background, context.
The history was totally distorted to favor one group.
And it is unfortunately continuing. That is why exercises such as these are important.
Little by little, the truth will come out.
Well,
I'm glad that you have asked me to join this conversation so that at least we can somehow correct the distortions of history.
I am very grateful to you.
And I'm willing to challenge anybody here in this country to debate with me about the events.
Well, Tito, your knowledge and your perspective is based on actual experience and actual facts. I think that is the difference between you
I did not
and those that have been
facts.
challenging you.
I have not lied to the people. I have not manipulated the events. I dealt with them as I faced them.
Well, Tito, on that note,
Thank you.
I know it is for me to thank you for allowing us a view into the...
Anytime, any place, I'm always at your service.
Just tiyag ni natata. Thank you very, very much.